welcome to the TTELT podcast, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers, a program of educators worldwide. I will be your host today, Maya Moore. On today's episode, we are joined by Courtney Miles. Courtney currently works with students throughout the Middle East and North Africa, teaching language and leadership as an English language fellow with the Embassy of Bahrain. Welcome back to the podcast, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Maya. I'm excited to be back and share a new tip today. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Courtney will be sharing with us some tips on how to get students to open up and share their experiences in the classroom. So Courtney, could you give us some context here? Tell us about why you started to think about this issue and why you started to bring together some tips or some strategies rather to get students to open up in the classroom.
Definitely. Yes. So this is something just recently that in the classroom, I kind of realized that I was asking some of the same questions during these beginning moments of class. For some context, I teach online. I work with mostly around university age students, some a little older, some a little younger. But if you are in the online classroom, and maybe even in an in-person classroom, usually those first minutes, maybe people are kind of trickling in one by one. And I kind of realized, I had these 5 to 8 minutes where I wasn't really using it in the best way that I could, or honoring the students' times who were there. And maybe just asking some of the same questions over and over, like, how was your weekend? What did you do today? And I realized you're always going to get a really similar answer. And so I wanted to just diversify that a little bit and really encourage students to use that talk time and facilitate better questions, better opportunities for students to really talk about themselves and talk about their experiences with each other.
Right. So I love what you just said there at the end, facilitating the discussion at the beginning of class and also honoring the time of the students that showed up on time. Right. Right. Yeah. But I know I've been, someone that has asked the question, how was your weekend? Or, what did you do yesterday? Just asking those same questions and getting the same response. And then there's just silence. And so we're really talking about how to increase that student talk time and fill the silence with something that is meaningful and intentional. So really excited to hear about what questions and activities and what you started to do to really, make the best use of that time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely tried, a few different things. I think firstly, just some more open-ended questions, deeper questions, beyond just, how was your weekend? And not that that's a bad question, but, some deeper questions that really help students to think and maybe use some different vocabulary and phrases and have to, engage with one another. As TESOL instructors, we know that talk time is important, and having authentic conversation really increases that talk time and maybe also that intrinsic motivation to want to talk. And all of those things are important in learning a language, expressing your thoughts, getting what you need, resolving conflicts, asking for help, learning from each other. And even just in that 5 to 8 minutes, that can be a real opportunity for students to engage in that every single class. So yeah, I think I started, just with some more deeper level questions, usually that had something related to what we would talk about that day, and really focused on students and their opinions. So they get to, really share what they feel, share what they think, realize that there's not a correct answer. I think that's an important part of this, that students don't feel like, oh, I have to navigate this correctly or give you the right answer that you're looking for, like maybe some other activities that happen in class. But this is a real opportunity where, there's not a right answer. It's just your opinion. It's you, it's your experience, how you feel, what you think. And I think that's really valuable and important in class.
Right. And that takes the pressure and the stress off of the student searching for the correct answer to the question. There is no right answer in this situation because you're asking them to share something about their own lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is correct. So could you give us some examples of those deeper open-ended questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Recently we've been talking a little bit about culture. So some questions that we began talking with there, depending on the level of the class, you could ask something like, what makes you special? Or what makes you important? You could start somewhere like that. We played a game in a couple of the classes where students gave 2 truths and a lie about themselves. Again, about where we were going to navigate into culture, but it was really cool because students were, sharing and thinking through facts about themselves, things that were unique or maybe different that would trick their classmates. So it was fun, engaging. Students, I think for the most part, were happy that they, increased that motivation to even be there on time as we were going through a game together right when they joined. And so it was a great way to kind of then navigate into vocabulary surrounding culture and some other activities. But yeah, and I think, some other things there, I might ask a question like, who do you admire the most? Or, philosophical, you could ask, what is your definition of happiness? You could go in a lot of different directions based on what you'll talk about that day. But I think regardless, at least for me, it's been important to kind of start and have that first touch that students get in class to be just open,
Right. And I think it's important that you're talking about connecting it to the lesson for the day. So there's a purpose to it, there's intention to it. And there's not that there's any problem with asking, how's everybody doing? How was your weekend? That type of thing. But then having a deeper question that will, make the lesson that you have planned for the day go a little bit farther. I think that's really important to note as well. Going back to the game that you mentioned, the 2 truths and a lie, could you tell us about that for the folks that have never played that game or tried it? Could you tell us what that is?
Yeah. So everyone writes down 2 things about them that are true and 1 thing that's not true. And the goal is for it to be a little bit tricky. So you would read your 3 statements for the class, and they would have to guess which one is not true. So I think it's a really great thing to play maybe a little bit into after you've known each other for a little bit. Students have maybe already introduced themselves, like had a couple of conversations, so they know each other a little bit at least.
Okay.
And it's really cool because, students try to trick each other and sometimes they learn really surprising things about each other, get to share deeper things about themselves. For me, I know because I'll always play these games with my students, it helps me even think, okay, like what is something interesting or unique or something that someone might not guess just by looking at me, or having a few conversations with me. So that's a fun game. I've played that in classes before in some different ways. I remember one time where I had every student write down their 2 truths and a lie. And at the beginning of class, we would read 2 or 3. So we might not have time depending on how many people are in your class, you might not have time for, 15 students to share, 10 students to share. But, making that time for 2 or 3 at the beginning of every class, I remember was really fun.
Right. And it adds a little bit of interest at the beginning of class. It's just a different way to start. And like you said, then you can start working on vocabulary as well. So for your online classes, I'm just curious, are folks putting these, are folks putting them in the chat, or are they reading them out loud, on Zoom? How does that work?
Yeah, so through online, most students wrote it in the chat. I gave them some think write time, which I like to do anyway, just for students to think a little bit deeper. And some students, I know myself personally, when I write, I think through things a lot more clearly. And so I like to give that time. And then most students put it in the chat, or I would write it in the chat if they just wanted to share it verbally so other students could remember what they said. And then using Zoom, we used the reactions, and I would call out each statement and students raise their hand for the one they thought was the lie. And then the student would share, and also maybe share a little bit about the things that were true, share about, if there's a truth hidden in the lie, things like that. So it was cool to even go beyond just those questions or just those statements, and students could share even more about themselves. I think starting with something like this, where, things are open, there is not a correct answer, we're exchanging, we're learning about each other, and making that the norm of the classroom, I think has really benefited my own classes. And I can see ways where, whether you're working with kids or adults or online or in person, that can be implemented in a way for students to share about themselves and learn from each other.
Right. Well, you've shared some great tips with us today, and so what we're talking about here to kind of get students to open up and get talking at the beginning of class, so asking those open-ended questions, asking the deeper questions. So just going a little bit deeper than how was your weekend, or how is everyone doing, or did you do your homework? But asking something deeper, like what makes you happy, or who do you look up to? Those types of deeper questions. And then also using games, but a game that you can complete within 5 to 8 minutes, right? It doesn't take over time that you have that you need for your lesson.
Right.
So could you tell us, for folks who are like, wow, this, I want to start doing this, how could they start, implementing this new approach to starting class right away? Like, let's say tomorrow or this week.
Yeah. Again, like, I think for me, really starting with that has made a huge difference just in how students come to class, increasing that motivation to be on time, because it usually is a time that people enjoy. So that's my suggestion, at the beginning, but I mean, looking at your class layout and asking, where does that fit in? Where would that fit in for me naturally? Every class is different. If you have students all day, it's different than if you have them for, an hour or two. So really looking at that schedule and thinking, how can I put this into the routine? I think making that a norm and an expectation can really be, hopefully, a time that students look forward to in the class routine, and something that might continue to motivate them to want to show up, to talk, grow in confidence.
Right. Well, thank you again, Courtney, for joining us for another TTELT podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been a really interesting discussion, and I know that our listeners are going to walk away from this, like, knowing what they can do to get started. And this is a kind of a challenge that a lot of teachers face. Mm-hmm. So thank you. So for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another podcast. We'd love for you to share with us how you are using these tips in your classroom. So please leave us a comment or a voice message on social media or at ttelt.org. Again, this has been an episode of TTELT brought to you by educators worldwide. You can follow, like, and subscribe to TTELT on your social media, and we hope you will try these new teaching tips this week.